I'm Jeff Glor from CBS This Morning Saturday. Today we have a show chock full of science that really has it all. Coffee, wine, outer space, and mummies. What more could you want? First up, Dana Jacobson's story that takes us from a coffee genome to a cold brew that doesn't use beans at all.
The main goal today is to illustrate the principle of conservation of mass.
Bill Ristenpart isn't your average chemical engineering professor.
Part A, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of brews in the Mr. Coffee. Use the same amount of water every time, okay, but then systematically vary the mass of the coffee grounds.
In his Introduction to Chemical Engineering class, The Design of Coffee, students get to discover the science inside a cup of joe.
And then part B, this is really exciting, we get to do our first roast. Are you guys excited about that? Woo! Yeah, okay, cool, right?
Ristenpart started the class in 2013 as a freshman seminar. The idea came to him during, what else? A coffee break with a colleague.
We were drinking coffee one day thinking about how to improve our engineering labs, and she suggested that idea, why don't we have our students take apart a Mr. Coffee drip brewer? And I thought, oh my gosh, why don't we make a whole class about coffee?
The class that started with just 18 students is now attended by 2,000 a year. Its popularity was highlighted a few years back in a campus poll.
One of their questions was, what is the best general education class? And number one was the design of coffee. Number two was introduction to human sexuality. And number three was introduction to beer brewing. And so now we like to say that at UC Davis, coffee is better than beer and sex.
It's a good selling point for a lot of people.
It is. What we didn't anticipate was how much interest there was from the industry. And they came to us and said, hey, you know, we need research. There are a lot of unanswered questions about coffee. Coffee faces a lot of issues, and we would love to partner with somebody in academia.
UC Davis is well known for its agricultural research in fields like beer brewing and viticulture, or wine growing. They actually have a vineyard right on campus.
And so one of our big goals is to make UC Davis an international location of excellence to create an academic talent pipeline to support the coffee industry.
They've already built a coffee center with a prototype pilot roastery run by the former head roaster at Blue Bottle Coffee, a brewing and espresso laboratory, and a dedicated sensory lab. In all, there are about 35 professors teaching courses on everything from food science to global social change in coffee cultures, 1500 to present.
Why do we need somebody who knows how to do these things?
Anything that helps the coffee industry produce better cups of coffee at higher quality to increase demand helps not only people here in the United States, but also there's a tremendous number of people around the world who live in developing countries whose livelihood depends on coffee. And so there's about 100 million people who make a living by picking coffee.
One of the existential threats to their livelihoods and our cups of coffee is climate change.
It's a huge concern. There are lots of discussions right now about whether we'll have coffee in 30 years.
3 years ago, UC Davis had a breakthrough that could have a profound impact on coffee's survival, when Juan Medrano and Alan Van Dynes became the first geneticists to create a reference genome for a coffee bean.
For the layperson, what does that mean when you say there's no genome to reference?
There was no reference genome, so there's no book that tells me what is the sequence and the genes in the coffee genome.
Okay.
And that was very surprising to me because being an industry that is $20 billion industry, 2.4 billion cups of coffee every year, and there's no genome sequence when most crops have a sequence.
Why do we need the genomes for plants like this?
It's a tool in plant breeding. It's the second most traded commodity in the world, but nobody's looking at it at the plant level.
The pair homed in on C. arabica, the bean behind 70% of worldwide consumption. Coffee is grown almost exclusively outside of the United States, but Van Dynes and Medrano picked a geisha variety grown in Goleta, California, from the Goodland Organics farm we first featured nearly 3 years ago.
All that will set.
Basically, you take leaves of coffee, of a coffee plant.
Right.
And these leaves of coffee plants are macerated, and you extract DNA from the cells inside the leaves.
Okay.
And then you create a collection of DNA fragments.
What we ended up putting together was 1.2 billion base pairs, so pieces of DNA. They're not 100% in order, but they're in very good shape.
The goal is to breed a plant that can grow at higher altitudes and fight diseases like rust.
We say this all the time, but the coffee bean it's magical.
Outside of academia, the Seattle startup Atomo Coffee is taking the exact opposite approach to coffee research. Food scientist Jarrett Stopforth and his co-founder Andy Kleitsch want to make coffee without the bean. They call it molecular coffee.
We talk about how when he told me he wanted to hack coffee that it blew my mind, but it really did. It always gets everyone just imagining, like, what is that? How does that work? Ship it up to Seattle.
Atomo mixes plant-based agricultural byproducts and caffeine that, when combined, mimics actual coffee, down to the aroma and flavor. The company, which launched last February on Kickstarter, has raised $2.5 million in venture capital.
We joke around that this is like the $10,000 cup of coffee right now, but as we scale our production, we'll see our costs drop pretty dramatically, in which we should be able to make coffee that is great tasting, that is actually cheaper to produce than coffee today.
Atomo plans to roll out its cold brew coffee later this year as it waits for patent approval, while UC Davis has made the Arabica genome publicly available to anyone.
Why not make money off of it?
The basic knowledge of the reference genome, it's really an opportunity for many scientists, for many people in different parts of the world to benefit and produce great coffees from it. And that's the ingenuity.
This is pre-competitive research is a good way of looking at it. We're a public institution, and the idea is let's raise the bar for everybody.
Medrano, who's now retired from the university, is a co-founder of Fringe Coffee with Jay Ruski of Goodland Organics.
This is our greenhouse. This plant right here, this one that says geisha.
Yeah.
This is exactly the one that was sequenced. This is a unique hybrid, that is resistant to frost. This coffee has 40% less caffeine.
The midday coffee, so
A
you're not
midday
too
coffee,
awake
right.
and not too tired.
But it has a very floral, very exquisite flavor.
The aroma is fantastic. I would say this is an all-day drinking coffee. It's delicious, really delicious.
UC Davis is also doing some research with the wine industry in Napa Valley. We'll have that story after the break. If you love a good Cabernet Sauvignon, this next story is for you. It is about grapes from Northern California, climate change, and scientific research. Here's Jamie Yukas.
While a red wine should be aged in barrels, these Cabernet grapes are dying on the vine. Andy Beckstoffer has been growing grapes for some of the biggest names in California wine country since the early 1970s.
How much cab do you drink a day?
Breakfast, lunch, or dinner.
But he's concerned about his future harvest.
The big deal is the erratic nature that we have with climate here. We have bugs we never heard of. We have diseases we never heard of before. We've changed the way we farm because of it.
You're fighting against climate change.
Yes.
Here in Napa Valley, cab is king. It's also where researchers are trying to save it, with 11 different projects happening all over the area.
You want to keep the wine quality.
That's right. We want to keep it delicious and cost worthy of that $300 bottle.
Beckstoffer Vineyards is investing tens of millions of dollars, partnering with UC Davis for the world's most ambitious Cabernet Sauvignon rootstock and clone trial. Vineyard manager Clint Nelson and researcher Con Curterall say the area has heated up by nearly 2 degrees a year. It may not sound like much, but viticulturalists say it's enough to eventually make Cabernet grapes extinct.
We cannot just say like, we'll start thinking about it 20 or 30 years from now. You have to, take action now.
What does it mean to this area that you're doing this research?
We don't look at this as just a Northern California trial or experiment. We look at this as an industry-wide trial.
UC Davis is using shade nets, switching from horizontal to vertical planting, and various technology to grow a better, stronger grape.
Do you have naysayers?
They might think we're going too far, spending too much money doing it. We're chasing things that won't turn up.
Researchers are testing 100 combinations, but it will take at least 6 years to yield results. Like any fine wine, Beckstoffer says it will take time. But the fate of one of America's most famous valleys may hang in the balance.
We'll use that data not only to fight climate change, but in the best spot, hopefully, to improve the wine quality. That's the big deal.
After the break, we're heading for a planet far, far away. We'll be right back. Despite its unwelcoming atmosphere, 900-degree surface temperatures, and sulfuric acid rainstorms, to name just a few, NASA has its sights set on Venus as a way to learn more about Earth.
The Mariner spacecraft, now on its way to Venus, is the most intricate instrument in the history of space science.
Just 3 months after President Kennedy made that speech in September 1962, NASA completed the first successful flyby of Venus, a crucial moment in the Cold War space race with the Soviet Union. 10 years later, Moscow responded when a probe reached the surface of Venus, the first time any country successfully landed on a different planet. Venus was hot in more ways than one.
After a 15-month-long cruise, the Magellan spacecraft will go into orbit around Venus on August 10th.
In 1990, America's Magellan spacecraft beamed back the best pictures yet, showing a hellish landscape where the average surface temperature is just under 900 degrees. But for the last 3 decades, almost nothing.
Venus is like a lost world. You know, it has mists, it's shrouded in clouds and mystery, but there's a whole suite of instruments that we would like to send there to unveil what's beneath those clouds and really discover those secrets.
Here at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California, Sue Smerkar is the #1 advocate for a new mission to Venus. When you look at this, do you dream of seeing someone there?
I dream of seeing spacecraft there.
For the last generation, with Venus on the back burner, the main focus here has been on Mars, with another attention-grabbing mission this summer. Mike Watkins is the lab's director. We met him in the center of the universe, so-called because inside this room, NASA communicates with more spacecraft at greater distances than any other location in the world.
We talk to them all, we command them, and we get their data down through this room.
The lab Watkins now runs was formed in the 1930s, focusing on rocket and jet technology. These days, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory no longer does any jet propulsion. That shift happened after JPL successfully launched the first U.S. satellite in 1958, a response to Sputnik.
Explorer is in orbit, broadcasting to the world its coded scientific data.
And I think when that happened, we realized, hey, building that satellite on top of the rocket is the cool part. And so we kind of gave up on rockets at that time and really concentrated on building spacecraft.
The spacecraft Watkins and his team will soon be tracking is a still unnamed rover, the main focus of the Mars 2020 project. We watched the final days of its assembly before it's packed up in giant crates and flown to Florida for July's launch.
They're just about to lift this thing up.
Ken Farley is the mission project scientist at Mars 2020. His job is about as daunting as it gets. Somehow get samples that could show signs of life from Mars back to Earth.
There are no samples that have ever come back from Mars. There are samples that have come back from comets, but this is a whole different business.
And if you're able to get that, that's big.
That's huge, yep.
However, the huge challenges presented by Mars could pale in comparison to the issues presented by another trip to Venus. It's been referred to as the hell of the solar system.
Yes.
It can melt lead.
Yes.
And there's tons of sulfuric acid rainstorms.
Yes.
Why go?
Venus has so many lessons for understanding, rocky planets in general, and particularly understanding Earth.
Scientists at NASA say Venus was probably the first planet in our solar system to have the conditions to allow life to form. But its atmosphere is now at 97% carbon dioxide, a heat-trapping gas that's superheating the planet. Finding out why that happened could help us understand what's taking place here on Earth.
We can learn about the very early processes that shape the surface of the Earth if we study what's going on today on Venus. And we have this greenhouse that is incredibly intense on Venus. So it has tons of lessons for us to take in as we try to prevent our greenhouse from getting worse.
If you look at Venus, the Earth, and Mars, you see 3 almost identical planets, kind of in similar locations. They probably started off similarly, and they went completely different directions. Mars turned into a desert with a very thin atmosphere. Venus turned into an oven with a very thick atmosphere, and we turned out Goldilocks, just perfect. And I think scientists would like to understand exactly how did that happen and what drove that.
3 planets, 3 very different directions, but all with important lessons as the team working in the center of the universe tries to answer the central scientific question.
Is there life out there?
I have to believe there is.
It's pretty crazy to think about.
It is. It's also crazy to think it's more in our reach now than it's ever been before.
Up next, the new calendar that could revolutionize the way we live. And we'll tell you what a mummy's voice would really sound like. Yes, you heard that. We'll be right back. We all know leap years come once every 4 years, but do they need to? And would eliminating them save you money? Since the beginning, humankind has been obsessed with tracking time. And nearly every civilization has tried to squeeze that time into an accurate calendar. But for thousands of years, we were missing one crucial element: the leap year.
I think that time is very confusing sometimes when you have to think about it.
Jackie Faherty is an astrophysicist at the American Museum of Natural History's Hayden Planetarium in New York City. When people think about the day, February 29th, what should they think about?
We're placing a human construct around what is an astronomical phenomenon of the Earth moving around the sun. So it's kind of a celebration of the fact that we'd really like to be better timekeepers, and we haven't quite figured out how to do it quite correctly yet.
The calendar we use includes leap years because of how long it really takes the Earth to orbit the sun, which is not 365 days. It's about 365 and a quarter. People are fascinated by this.
It's a fascinating topic. What could be more fascinating than how we fit into time and our relationship with time and our relationship with the universe?
Alexander Boxer is the author of a new book, A Scheme of Heaven, which chronicles the path that human inquiry took from astrology to today's big data algorithms, including how we organize dates. When people think leap year today, what should they think of?
I think they should think that our calendar is this fascinating product of many civilizations, each of whom have tried to contribute a piece to make sure we stay in sync with the seasons. And the leap year marked the end of an attempt to sync up the calendar with the cycles of the moon and an acceptance of a calendar that was purely solar.
It was the Egyptians who first made that leap around 2500 BC. But it wasn't until Julius Caesar that the calendar began to take the form we know today. The Julian calendar in 46 BC was the first to add a leap day every 4 years, but it still wasn't quite right. That led to the Gregorian calendar, which set the leap year pattern we've used since the 16th century. But some think it's high time for another big change. You guys have been working on this calendar for how long?
Decades.
And so far?
Nada.
Enter Dick Henry and Steve Hankey, professors at Johns Hopkins University, and the biggest current backers of a brand new calendar, one that eliminates leap years and also standardizes the days and weeks to always be the same each year.
January 1 is always on a Monday, forever.
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 In addition to starting every year on a Monday, the Hankey-Henry permanent calendar would also set your birthday and the holidays to the same day of the week every year, except October 31st, which along with all Friday the 13th would vanish. In place of leap years, every 5 or 6 years, an extra week is inserted at the end of December, sort of an extended Christmas vacation. Variations of this idea have been discussed for more than a century, but to no avail. There's no such thing as a perfect calendar. You just think this is better than what we have now.
Ours is very close to perfect. We have current calendar. Every year, the thing jerks around by a day or two. And think how many people around the world, and sports schedules and all these things that jump and jerk around.
But aren't quirks and eccentricities part of the human existence?
We could make things worse and then you'd be happier.
Well, they cost a lot, though.
Henry and Hankey say their calendar is more efficient because it makes school calendars more predictable and evenly divides business quarters, which would simplify financial calculations. They say it would save, on average, every person $575 a year. What you're saying is I'm not going to get $575 in my pocket if this change happens, but it is going to save both workers and companies money and time.
General efficiency. It's real.
If it's real, why do you think it hasn't changed until now?
People are in a rut, and it's very, very hard to change your thinking.
Besides ditching leap years, Hanke and Henry also want to eliminate time zones.
It's already implemented for all the airline pilots. They use Greenwich Mean Time, and they better, because if they're flying across the Mississippi River, they don't want to change their watches by an hour and then change their watches. I mean, it's ludicrous.
I wish you guys got passionate about this.
No, I mean, look, I'm stuck on this planet with the rest of you, and I see us having a silly system here that is costing us.
It may be costing us money. The question is whether a new calendar would cost us some of our identity.
Either you can see the calendar as this pristine sense of how the universe works, or you can see it as a human product that really represents the contributions of people over thousands of years to try and incrementally improve our knowledge of where we are in the universe.
Does it make sense to get rid of a leap year or leap seconds?
Calendar changes, people I think are resistant to because of what it means from the infrastructure of how we all live our lives. The Earth doesn't really care what day you call it. It knows where it is. It's going around the sun, doing the thing it always does. And I really just want to know, where is the Earth in reference to the sun right now?
With the help of a 3D printer, scientists recreated the sound of a 3,000-year-old Egyptian priest's voice. Michelle Miller tells us how.
With their moans, groans, and screams, Hollywood's mummies have always given us chills. Researchers in England let us hear what a real mummy sounds like. That's the voice of Nessie Amun, an Egyptian priest who lived 3,000 years ago. Scientists were able to mimic Nessie Amun's voice by recreating his mouth and vocal cords with a 3D printer. It allowed them to produce a single sound. Nessie Amun was chosen for this research because his remains were well preserved during mummification, and also because there are inscriptions in his coffin about his hope to speak again after death, a desire from the ancient world fulfilled by modern technology.
Scientists hope to use someday the same technology to recreate a living person's voice. More news and more stories like this every week on CBS This Morning Saturday, and you can find news 24/7 right here on CBSN, featuring live anchored coverage available for free across all platforms. I'm Jeff Glor.